I am Flavia Zimmerman from the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Western Australia, and today we have with us Dr. Jeffrey Wilson. Dr. Jeffrey is a scholar from Murdoch University, and he is a fellow of the Asia Research Centre and a senior lecturer in international political economy. His research interests include international political economy, economic regionalism in the Asia-Pacific, and international resource politics. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Jeffrey.
Thanks very much, Flavia.
Our first question today would be about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. If you could please explain to us what exactly comprises the TPP and also the main benefits for the Australian economy.
So the TPP is what's sometimes referred to as a mega regional trade agreement, a giant trade agreement bringing together, in the TPP's case, 12 countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Now the TPP is unique because it combines some of the big developed country heavyweights in Asia, like the United States, Japan and Singapore, with a number of developing countries in the region, particularly emerging economies like Malaysia and Vietnam, and it's one of the first agreements to do this. It's also significant because its members describe it as a 21st century trade agreement, which is the term they use. And what this means is that the TPP isn't just about doing more trade liberalisation, but doing it in a qualitatively new way and breaking new ground in new policy areas. Some of these are known as WTO plus areas because they're policy areas that the World Trade Organization has not gotten around to or made trade law in yet. And a number of these things are issues such as investment protection, transparency, labour standards, environment, intellectual property and service sector. And this is particularly significant for Australia because as a country with a rapidly transforming services economy, the TPP offers to create new trade law for the first time in international trade law in areas of critical interest for the sectoral composition of the contemporary Australian economy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey, for your brilliant remarks. Also, in the light of the current political developments in the United States and the endorsement of Donald Trump as the Republican candidate, could you please just give us some remarks on the future of the TPP?
Well, the TPP has a very interesting history in terms of its ratification, the process by which countries, after negotiation, agree to make it into their own law and set it up as a formal institution. Because while it was very much a product of the US, it was a US initiative, proposed and contains a lot of American ideas about trade policy, once the negotiations were finished, US domestic politics collapsed inwards and very much undermined the agreement that they themselves had worked very hard to create. President Obama supports the deal, but unfortunately it doesn't have enough members of his own party to get through in Congress at the moment. And there's some suggestion that what he's going to attempt to do is take this to what's known as the lame duck Congress session later in this year and try and sneak it through, which will need Republican rather than Democrat votes to get up. Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State who launched the TPP, and yet has now, as a presidential candidate, come out mildly against the agreement. And some of this has to do with her candidacy for the presidency and an attempt to insulate herself against populist critiques, particularly from certain sections of the electorate that are anti-free trade. So people suspect that if she was to win the presidency, while she might not actively support its ratification, she would turn a blind eye while President Obama lame ducks it through. Donald Trump is against the TPP and has said so, and we would presume that as president he would veto it even if the Congress tried to ratify the agreement. That said, Trump's foreign and economic policies are not very clearly enumerated or developed at the moment, and it's very unclear what in any of these spaces that the Trump administration would or wouldn't do or who would comprise it. Another interesting aspect to this is that the bulk of the congressional and societal support in the US for the TPP comes from the Republican Party. So there's a situation where there's almost a cross-party crossover between how the patterns of presidential and congressional support for the agreement is developing at the moment. We would probably say that if Clinton wins the presidency, the agreement will be swept through by Obama later in the year. If Trump wins the presidency, who knows?
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeffrey. And do you think that Under a Trump presidency, the risk of not ratifying the TPP would be then increased.
This would certainly be the case, and if the United States doesn't ratify the agreement, it's effectively dead. For the TPP and the actual treaty, 6 of the 12 member states have to ratify it, so enact it into their own laws, and those 6 members have to account for at least 85% of the combined GDP of the area. And that means that it pretty much includes all the large countries mandatory. So the United States would have to ratify, Japan, Canada, Singapore, Australia. If any one of these bow out, it would almost kill the deal, and if the US does, absolutely. So what this means is that the whole future of the treaty itself really hangs on the outcome of the presidential election in November. It's hard to say what would happen in a Trump situation, but given the fact that he has said that he is opposed to the deal and would veto the deal if it was passed, we would have to assume that that's the kind of actions that he'll take for the time being.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Dr. Jeffrey, could you please explain to us what would be the implications of the TPP failing and the major implications for Australia and for the region?
Well, fortunately for the Asia Pacific, if the TPP fails, there is another mega regional trade agreement that's been proposed. This one's called the RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. It's similar to but different from the TPP. Its similarity is that it's also a mega regional trade agreement, so an attempt to bring lots of different countries in Asia together to sign a new region-wide FTA. But there's a lot of things that make it different as well. Firstly, it is based on ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the 6 free trade agreements that the ASEAN bloc has already signed with other countries. So that's with China, Japan, Korea, India, New Zealand and Australia. So it includes a wider range of Asian countries, but it doesn't include the United States. It's also largely politically pushed by China. So this is seen as sometimes the Chinese rival to the TPP, based on a more Asian model rather than American-style model. And RCEP has much lower levels of ambition when it comes to trade policy reform. Rather than trying to bite off difficult issues like investment and intellectual property and services, it is more that RCEP members are more content to try and harmonise their standards and bring tariffs on trading goods down. And so this means that if the TPP fails, then the RCEP agreement may be able to move in and step in its place. RCEP is still under negotiation, but the member states have said that they intend to complete negotiations by the end of 2016, this year. So in the situation in November, if the TPP fails, RCEP will be ready to move into the space.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Jeffrey. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.